Shira Stutman is a rabbi, podcaster, writer, and teacher. She's the founding rabbi of Sixth and I in Washington, D.C., a congregation she led for over a decade. In 2021, she founded Mixed Multitudes, an organization dedicated to sharing the beauty, power, and diversity of Jewish life, tradition, and conversation. As of 2023, she serves as the interim rabbi at Aspen Jewish Congregation and also co-hosts Chutzpod, a podcast that shares Jewish approaches to life's significant predicaments. And finally, she just published a new book, The Jewish Way to a Good Life, Find Happiness, Build Community, and Embrace Loving Kindness, which we will touch upon in this conversation. Shira, welcome.
David, it is really nice to be here. I have been looking forward to this for a long time.
Me too. It's been a long time coming. So first of all, you are a dear friend and a colleague and one of the smartest people that I know. And I always have fun talking to you about so many different things. And since you also were someone who was in the podcast space well before I entered it, and so many people have listened to Chutzpod, and if you haven't, we invite you to go and listen to it. It's really interesting and fun and all of those things. When I was thinking about what I would wind up talking about on my podcast, the idea of detours and destinations was really resonant, like the ability to talk to people about where they are, where they've been, where they're going. So let's start with the first destination of sorts, which is, for those who will be watching, they'll see, but like for those who are listening, where are you and what are you holding in your hand?
All right. Do not mock my microphone, Reb David, which has on it what we like to call the shtreimel. It has like this fuzzy cap on it so that when I speak, I don't know, the producers can tell you it's something about my P's or my Q's. I don't know. So I'm holding my microphone. But where I am physically is in Aspen, Colorado. So I'm in the middle of the beautiful mountains of the Roaring Fork Valley, which is a real balm in difficult times. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I know Aspen well and used to serve there too for a brief period and been that. It's so beautiful there, and they're so lucky to have you. And I love the little shtreimel, the little kind of fur hat on the top of your microphone.
Correct. Yeah, no, I mean, it served me well over the years and sort of reminds me of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of God's presence whenever I'm recording the podcast.
It's like you're putting a yarmulke on your recording device. I like that. I love that.
Correct. That's right. Know before whom you podcast. That's
I
what I think
love it.
every single time.
So detours and destinations, so now we know where you are. I'm so curious. I think a lot of us would benefit to hear how you got there and the kind of route that you took to the rabbinate and also to eventually arriving at the work that you're doing in Aspen. But more broadly and abstractly, before we kind of get into the details, when I say destination in Jewish life or in life more broadly, one of the things that you do so well is in your teachings and in your podcasting is talk about what Judaism has to say about various things, right? So maybe for listeners who are not familiar with you, teach us a little bit about what Judaism has to say about destinations and detours. And does it say anything about destinations and detours?
I mean, I think that lived Judaism, rabbinic Judaism at its core is all about detours, right? Because if you think about the Talmud, which is like 5,500 odd pages of rabbis taking the most sometimes odd, sometimes interesting, sometimes deeply offensive detours to get to, I guess, what their destination would be, which is sort of a deep understanding of what God and Judaism and the Jewish community asks of us. So it's funny. I do think we are a people of detours. I mean, it took us 40 years to get across the desert, which I don't know how long it was. It's like a 3-day walk or something. Yeah. And actually, if you think about that part, and David, Torah so well, if you think about the part of, I think it's the portion is either Matot Maseh or Matot Maseh, where we list every single step on the journey that the Israelites took between slavery and the promised land. That's really who we are. There is a destination, which I would say is messianic times, but we're all about the detour, which is where we are right now.
I love that you brought in the end of the book of Numbers that we both know well, and maybe our listeners, some of them will know that the Torah will enumerate the 42 different stations that the Israelites went through in their journeys in the desert. And what you were referring to also is that they kind of took the longer, shorter way, that they could have gone directly into the land, but they didn't. They had to go through all of these circuitous and maybe strangely oblique, orthogonal ways or all over the desert. And that seems to be part of the journey itself. When I think about the way that our tradition begins Abraham's life, is that he's definitely has a destination, right? He hears the call in Genesis 12, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go. I'm telling you where to go. God says to Abraham, then known as Avram, and he, no sooner does Avram enter the land, he summarily leaves it and kind of is taken on a detour, right? He's kind of like, I arrived, and then he goes down to Egypt because there's no food in the land. So it seems like you and I discussed this, the idea of what Yudah Kurtzer calls the problem of arrival. The Jews have an issue with arrival and kind of itching. We don't want to be complacent. We don't want to actually have arrived at some place or get there too easily. We want there to be detours. Like you said, the whole Talmud is just one big, long detour around life.
You just said 100 different things that I want to respond to, but the part that really made my heart stop for a second was when you said, we don't want anything that comes too easy. Like Jews, maybe because of our trauma and our history, we distrust things that are easy. To our detriment, I actually think. I think that sometimes actually we have in a certain way arrived in a certain space and we can just sit quietly for a minute. Maybe before we have to get up again, but at least in this minute there is quietude, and we Jews somehow are not able to sort of live into that. It's sort of, maybe it's the Brene Brown foreboding joy that you can't just look at your sleeping child and think, I love you, and just be in that moment. Instead, you're like, oh my gosh, tomorrow, what if they get hit by a car? Or what if I'm a terrible parent? Or what if... And so maybe what we need to learn as Jews is how to accept the destination, even if we know it's temporary.
Yeah, I'm hit by the same idea. I think that to some extent, the fascination that Buddhism or Eastern traditions more broadly had for Jews, and both of us have experienced this in our own professional lives, Jubus, we call them Jewish Buddhists, or Hu Jews, Hindu Jews, or Sufi Jews, or, yoga Jews, all these different, the Jews as the seekers, the perennial seekers, like the always looking for something, is maybe part of our DNA in a way. And it also it can make for a lot of therapists' energy and a lot of therapy. And it can also make for a lot of social justice and social change.
Correct. And by the way, I know people don't like talking about this, but it could also make for a lot of yearning for more money, right? There's this idea of we're always doing something new, building something new, going somewhere new. And we have very few prayers that teach enoughness. Dayenu. And, not many others. More of them teach, all right, more, yearn.
Right. It's kind of like the danger. I was talking yesterday about, in Judaism, there's an idea called the thing and its opposite. It's not just Judaism, but it's also in other traditions. But the thing and its opposite is that the same thing, of course, and its opposite are intimately connected, two sides of a coin. And sometimes there's another phrase in Judaism that God or heaven doesn't give halves. Like when you get a gift, it has the curse too in its extreme form, right? So you have yearning for anything, more. The idea of more. It can either be more love, more God, more justice, right? And it can also sometimes, once unleashed, become more of a lot of things: more money, more material things, more houses, right? More success, more ambition.
Wow, I've never heard that teaching before. Wait, what's the second teaching? That you don't get half of something?
That heaven doesn't give halves, that you get a whole of something. There's a lot there, right?
Yeah. I do a lot of couples counseling, and one of the issues that comes up over and over again with couples is that when two people marry each other, it is often the very thing they love the most about their partner, the fact that they listen to you when you talk, that ultimately becomes one of the most difficult pieces of the relationship, like the fact that they're too quiet and they don't talk enough, right? It's it's the same coin.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was talking about this, and you would love this in the context of the holiday that we're all celebrating. The Jewish people will be celebrating tomorrow, Purim, which is really the Jewish holiday of paradox and the thing and its opposite.
Yeah.
So I want to just shift gears slightly and just ask you, since we've explored destinations and how Jewish ambivalence maybe or wisdom around destinations, and at some point you and I were talking, you said, I think that Judaism believes in multiple destinations, like that we we might move through a lot of destinations, right? Not just one big one other than the Messiah, as you said. But what about detours? Because we touched on it. You said that in some way there are, rabbinic Judaism at least is very rooted in kind of detours and the unexpected. And in your life, maybe, like just taking it to the personal, if I had to ask you to think about a major detour in your life or pivotal moment in your life where something unexpected charted a different course for you and what that might have been, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you around that?
It's such a beautiful question. And as you're asking it, David, I'm thinking, like, on the one hand, in our intellectual discourse, we love detours. But in lived life, I wonder if Jews hate detours, right? Because of our trauma, because of all of our unexpected detours. We get kicked out of Spain and Portugal. That's an unexpected detour to somewhere else. And so I wonder if, as I think about my first statement that we are all about detours, so I wonder about, like, what parts of Judaism are about purposeful detours and what parts are about unexpected detours and the interplay between the two. Because also when you ask me that question, and I'm realizing one of the problems of this podcast, David, is I don't get to ask it back to you, but feel free to share.
I'll come to your podcast. I don't know if you interview people, but they're, happy to be on your podcast.
Oh, Baruch Hashem. Okay, we'll do that. So I guess one of the biggest detours of my life was meeting the man who actually, as we're recording, it's been 30 years almost to the day since we started dating. I had grown up conservative, Jewish day school, and then synagogue every Saturday. And then in college, I became Orthodox. And I was pretty set. I was going to be a modern Orthodox lady for the rest of my life. And I dated modern Orthodox guys. And then I met my husband, who is ethnically Jewish, but wasn't religiously Jewish in any way, shape, or form. And that changed the trajectory of my entire life because, in a way, my whole career, like since I was 21 years old, has been built on making a pitch to my husband about how Judaism can be meaningful to his life. Like, that's it. That's everything. The dedication of the book, right, is to Russell, who all of this is for. And so, yeah, that was the first of many detours in my life.
Your husband, does he know that he was a detour?
Yeah, he knows that he's with the detour, and he's a little annoyed by all of it. As I said, it's been 30 years. Like, I've gotten what I'm going to get out of him. He has accepted some parts of Judaism, and others are much more complicated for him. And in a way, I have built the right career for myself. So while it's true that, like, he was the first person who sort of took me outside my Jewish bubble, my Jewish triumphalist ghetto, into the wider world, he certainly wasn't the last. He was the first of thousands. And now that's what my career has been, a type of outreach and engagement to Jews and to spiritual seekers.
It's really great that you are able to reframe what, like that a detour becomes almost a destination, right? I think that one of the brachot, one of the blessings that I received from a friend many years ago was that he said, may all of your detours be destinations. And when you speak about your husband as an unexpected meeting, it also reminded me of the story that both of us are familiar with in the Joseph narrative, where Joseph is sent by his father Jacob to go find his brothers. And some mysterious character appears on the scene in the story and directs Joseph towards them. Now, in that situation, it was a detour that was very painful and took many years for Joseph to kind of make that potentially into a destination, to kind of see it as a blessing. But for you, when you look back, that so much of your work, your entire career is about being able to go outside of the way that you normally think about Judaism or about religion and be able to bring it to people who would otherwise not have access to it. That's a remarkable detour that became your calling.
Right. And some detours are quite painful.
Totally.
Right? Like the detour, as it were, of my father dying when he was 60 is a terrible detour. Like he was the most extraordinary man. He should not be dead. He should still be alive. And it has become a type of destination because I am better able to rabbi to people who also have suffered unexpected loss or who are broken in some way and who have a scar that will never fully heal, right? So some detours are beautiful, like finding my basheret, right? And some are deeply, profoundly sad And many are really scary.
Totally.
Just when I said that I was leaving Sixth and I, which is this synagogue spiritual community that I had helped to build, I had no idea what I was going to do. The image that I used was like, I've never actually been on a trapeze. Have you ever been on a trapeze?
Never.
Okay, let's pretend that we both have been on trapezes. And because you can imagine, it's like you're holding on to the trapeze, and at a certain point you have to let go in order to get to the next bar. And so with Sixth and I, it's like I let go, but I had no idea if anything was coming. Now, I did have a net under me of people who loved me, who I knew would catch me if I fell, but it was scary as hell. And so that was also another kind of detour that really took my breath away.
I love, you just basically gave us multiple experiences in detours and the danger. And we're using detour and destination in ways that we might use, multiple metaphors. I love the trapeze, the idea of having faith, and you have to let go before you can hold on to something new, and that the space between the two bars is a kind of scary moment. But I also love that the interrogation you just offered of, seeing a detour that might feel like it's too early for me to see it as planned or as a destination. You invited the possibility that somebody might work with an unexpected turn in their life or detour and see what blessing it might hold, but not force it or not make it like you must make all detours into destinations or else. Like there's some things that just refuse to be reduced or elevated or extracted for blessing. But I just want to pause for 1 second and take a detour in this conversation. You gave us a bit of your bio. Like, how did you arrive at being a rabbi? What was the plan? Was there an earlier plan to be a lawyer, to be an ice hockey player? What was your earliest sense of where you were going in your life?
Well, the most important part of this question, David, is that apropos our earlier conversation, I did get married before I decided to be a rabbi, because there's no way in hell my husband would have married a rabbinical student, right? So I sort of
Really?
brought him in. I secured the deal.
Wow.
But the story is much simpler than I think a lot of my Christian pastor friends who have had callings would want it to be. My mother was getting her PhD when she had my little brother, and she dropped out and she became a therapist. She was getting her PhD in social work, and she said to me,
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And so she was a therapist in Washington, D.C. And, my mother is one of the most important people in my life. She is my Rebbe. I listen to what she says. And so she said to me all the time, she said, whatever you decide to do with your life, get the highest possible degree. Probably it was because she had never gotten her PhD. So at a certain point, I was deciding what I wanted to do after undergrad. I had majored in American government because I grew up in Washington, D.C. So I always thought I was going to go into government. And I realized the two things I loved most in the world. I loved human beings. I love people. We are all broken. We are all somewhere on the continuum from good to not so good. I just love people. And the second thing I love is I love Judaism. I still believe all evidence to the contrary that religion can make your life better, right? Religion can give you a more meaningful existence. And so it's all right, when you connect Judaism and people, there's the rabbinate. And so it's the story is actually very simple. And so I started rabbinical school. First, my husband and I traveled for a year, and then I started rabbinical school. And 6 years later, here I am. And it's the best. No, it's also the worst. It's a very deeply, deeply meaningful job. That's what I'll say.
And a job that you do really, really well. But you said earlier that you were Orthodox, but then you decided to go back to a Reconstructionist rabbinical college. Reconstructionism might not be familiar to many of our listeners.
I know.
How do you talk about Reconstructionism? I mean, they don't do a good job with their branding, but they're reconstructing, they're reconstructed. What's Reconstructionism?
Right. Like the Jewish renewal movement, we will often say that we are the R&D arm of all of Judaism. So Reconstructionism is, the long and the short of it, Reconstructionism is sort of the left-wing arm of conservative Judaism. Now, I know lots of conservative rabbis will not like that I say that, but it's true. It was started by a conservative rabbi named Mordechai Kaplan, and basically it takes Jewish tradition, halakha, Jewish law, sacred Jewish texts. It takes it very seriously, but not literally. So a Reconstructionist prayer service, for instance, will be almost entirely in Hebrew. It will be spiritually minded, often using music or repeating only a part of the prayer rather than the whole thing in an attempt to get people to connect deeply with themselves. Reconstructionism has a very wide tolerance for differing beliefs in God. I mean, there are a million other ideas of what makes up Reconstructionism, like any other denomination. But what I often say shorthand is Reconstructionism, to a certain extent, is the way that most conservative Jews in America actually live their lives, right? So conservative Judaism is one thing, but conservative Jews is something entirely different, and it looks a lot like Reconstructionism. How is that on one foot?
I think that's pretty good. I mean, I think that
Thank you.
some people
Thank
might
you.
not know what conservative Judaism is, but I think let's just leave it at this: that both of these denominations were a response to the exposure of what we call now Orthodox Judaism, but we would just call it traditional Judaism until the Enlightenment, and then from the moment of the Enlightenment and the Emancipation, where Jews kind of moved out of their more isolated communities and shtetls and so on, Jews confronted modernity and the beginnings of modernity. And conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism are a response to those phenomena. There's more latitude around Jewish law, a greater autonomy for the individual. Reform did its thing, kind of moving away from Jewish law and placing heavy emphasis on autonomy. And then conservative Judaism tried to find somewhere in between the two, the traditional and the Reform, and then Reconstructionism kind of snuck in during the 20th century and the 21st century to make even more, I guess, more latitude, for lack of a better word. And so here you are, you graduate from RRC, from the Reconstructionist world. When did you know that you were really good with people and the two loves, Judaism and people, meaning that you were going to start something like Six and I? For those who don't know, Six and I was almost like, if those who are familiar with Chabad, it's often characterized as like a non-Orthodox Chabad, Lubavitch outreach, like a place to really meet people where they are, young people. There were like classes going on all the time. It was a really hip place to be. When did you know that? Like, was it just natural, or did somebody say to you, you'd be really great if you did this?
Well, actually, David, you don't realize what a great question that is. So first of all, I mentioned earlier, my husband and I traveled for a year before I started rabbinical school. And everywhere we went, from Indonesia to Peru to Vietnam, right to Nepal, we would go to Chabad. Every Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we're at Chabad. And I was able to bear witness to really the miracle that is the contemporary Chabad movement, of ways that they would just bring people in exactly as they are and accept them as they are. And I thought to myself, this is what liberal Judaism needs. And by liberal, for me, it might be political, but I mean that more like non-Orthodox Judaism needs. We need to accept people exactly as they are. And then skip forward a year or two, I'm in rabbinical school, and it's like one of the first weeks of rabbinical school, and my professor says, so when you do your first intermarriage, and I raise my hand and I say, oh, excuse me, professor, I'm never going to do intermarriages. And she sort of laughs at me and she says, yeah, and then one day your brother's going to call you Shira. She's just like, pipe the F down. So I did, and I started to listen. And here is my gift. If I have a gift, it is actually to listen to the people who are in front of me. So people, someone called the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and was like, I want someone to bar mitzvah my kid, which is like, it's problematic on so many levels. But I was like, all right, I'll do it. So I started to listen to her. She was part of an interfaith marriage. She had this one kid. And all of a sudden, I'm helping to tutor this kid and his friends, and we're building something together. The magic, if there was any magic, is that I was able to be part of what was already happening in American Judaism. And what was already happening in America. So the first time, there was a guy named Bill. And he said to me, this was, 2002. He says to me, Shira, I don't ever ask what I can do for Judaism. I ask what Judaism can do for me. And so my first instinct was what? It was to punch him in the face, right? That is the opposite of what Judaism is. That is there were so many levels that was offensive. And then, what do they say? When it's hysterical, it's historical. I sat with it a little bit, and I was like, why is this so deeply troublesome to me? And I went back to him and I said, all right, Bill, let's start with what Judaism can do for you. But one day, I want to talk about what you can do for Judaism. And that was how it all began.
That's a great story. And apropos of that great paraphrasing of John F. Kennedy's charge.
Correct.
Right. I guess I'm so curious about how this led to mixed multitudes, but essentially, I'm in the same boat as you. So, like, came from a similar story, my orthodoxy and then my ultra orthodoxy. I mean, there are certain places where it's very different, but for the most part, I might have also punched that person, wanted to punch that person for making that claim. And the historical and hysterical, it resonates for me, but I wonder, and I'm really wrestling with this, and I don't know if you are too, but like there is a point in which that becomes deeply consumerist and dangerous. Like there's a point in which, in my rabbinate, I've experienced over and over again, like becoming, like you become so attuned to the marketplace. You become so attuned to those who are fundamentally free to choose, and you're in a spiritual marketplace. How do you motivate people to choose? How do you motivate people to be involved because you believe that Judaism needs them and that they need Judaism, but you know that they have Peloton and they have, they have a million other options, and it won't work to tell them that it's the right thing to do because the right thing doesn't always motivate. People can know it's the right thing and still not do it. So you have to have some self-interest involved. So you say, what can Judaism do for me? And then you start enumerating it. I'm sure this is part of what your book is. Your book is essentially saying, for those who need to know why Judaism is really incredible, and I love it, and it'll really be good for you, read this book, right? I mean, is that what?
Correct.
But does it become dangerous? Do you think that we can go to the other side?
So I want to say two things. First of all, thank you for mentioning the book because my publicist would be very grateful to you. I'm supposed to mention it every single question you ask, and I've clearly done a very bad job thus far. Thank you. So the book is called The Jewish Way to a Good Life. I've done everything wrong. I'm supposed to have it behind me, all the things. And basically, it was written for human beings. It wasn't written for Jews. It wasn't written for non-Jews. And every single chapter tries to teach about a different Jewish technology, I'm not using that word literally, a different Jewish way of being, and how that can build meaning in your life, whether you're Jewish or not. So there's a chapter on the Jewish approach to the body, right? The idea that the body is on loan to us from God, right? Talking about that, how that can be meaningful to you. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not. There's a chapter on the Jewish approach to money, by the way, which I know is difficult for some people to talk about, but I actually think we have a very holy approach to money. By the way, again, it is that our money doesn't belong to us. So very, very much, this book was written with the consumer in mind. What is it that in 2025 people are thinking about? What is it in 2025 people want to talk about? And then I am responding to that, 100%. And as you're asking that really incisive and insightful question, David, which I kind of wish you hadn't asked, I'm thinking about what we were talking about just 10, 15 minutes ago about the two halves of the same coin. You are 100% correct that the flip side of the sort of proselytizing, come one, come all, you don't have to be Jewish to do Jewish. You like yoga? We'll do Jewish yoga. I know a rabbi who does Jewish Pilates. It's like, that's you. But, it's the problem of that is that we are sort of, what's the word? It's like we are stretching Torah so widely that it's going to rip in half. And then all we'll have is a broken Torah and empty space.
Yeah, that's the question. But I think that the answer is not either or, as in most of these cases. It's some combination of application, some combination of thinking about the consumer, as it were, the spiritual consumer. I often say the covenantal model is relational. Covenantal model is once you're married, right? It'll take a lot, and certainly there are legitimate reasons for people to break a covenantal relationship or to change it or for it to end. But falling in love, though, is legitimate. It's a legitimate beginning to choice. Like in a world where there is choice, what should motivate us is we've fallen in love. And ideally, I think both of us come from this place. And I love the way you frame this. You love people and you love Judaism. So why not, bring them together and show your love of Judaism to others and have them fall in love with it too? That's the beginning of the relationship. And then as they fall in love with it, they then say, okay, I'm making a commitment. It's not always going to be exciting. It's not always going to be meaningful. Not every service that has to be the best service or every practice the best practice, but I'm in the relationship. And I love using that way in. I think is living a life in constant desire to be living the good life. Is that a destination spiritually, do you think?
I do. Well, so first of all, the title of my book was chosen by my publisher. The journey of writing the book was very interesting, and I can tell next time we have a podcast together, I'll tell you about it. But I think if I wanted like a sort of non-creative name for the book, it would be The Jewish Way to Living a Meaningful Life, right? That's what Jews care about, is a meaningful life. And our North Star is a life of meaning, is that when we reflect back on our life, we can see that we made a difference in other people's lives. We can see that our life was of use and of service to others. Like that's really what the end goal is for Jews. But since this book isn't only for Jews, I think my publisher thought good was a more wide-ranging word.
Yeah, probably a good idea. Tell me about Mixed Multitudes. How did the Mixed Multitudes project?
Okay, so do you want to introduce the idea of the Mixed Multitudes, David, or should I?
No, I'd love to hear you.
So, as I'm sure you know, David, in the Torah, the book of Exodus, we learn that when the Israelites left Egypt after slavery, it wasn't just them. It was the Israelites and what is called the Erev Rav, translated as the mixed multitudes, like lots of people all mixed up. And over the course of Jewish history, lots of rabbis have tried to understand who exactly the mixed multitudes were. Who were these people that sort of left with the Israelites into the desert? And the truth is, as I'm sure you also know, the majority of ancient rabbis agree that they were actually not good guys, that they were like troublemakers who in the end incited the Israelites to do everything from sleep with non-Israelite women or, build a golden calf or whatever, I don't know what other terrible things the Erev Rav did. And that is entirely different from my understanding of who the Erev Rav could be. So I spent all of these years, first in Philadelphia at a congregation named Kesser Shalom. Actually, before that, at a congregation called Or Shalom with Rabbi Pam Friedman out in San Francisco, and then at Sixth and I. And what I found is that the Jewish community of the 21st century, in order for it to flourish, it needs a lot of non-Jews to keep the Jews honest. It needs a lot of spiritual seekers to keep the Jews honest. Because often the Jews, whether it's because they sort of feel Judaism in their kishkas, whether it's because they're embarrassed of how little they know, they don't show up with their full self for Judaism. They don't show up with their fullest self for davening, for prayer. They don't show up for learning. But you know who does? Spiritual seekers, including non-Jewish partners, people converting to Judaism. And so Mixed Multitudes was my attempt to say, whoever you are, whether you're Jewish or not, if you are interested in Jewish teachings, if you are interested in growing, welcome in. One of the problems, at least with contemporary Judaism, I wasn't alive in 1530, so I don't know if it was true then, but in contemporary Judaism, most Jews feel like they are in the outer circle. Like most Jews don't feel like they are in whatever it means. And so with that in mind, to me, the idea of mixed multitudes has expanded even beyond people who aren't Jewish to include all of those millions of Jews who are like, I'm a bad Jew. He's a better Jew than me. And just say, whoever you are, come one, come all.
So how did that manifest? Like, what did that look like? Like, was it programming?
Yeah, so what I would do, so when Mixed Multitudes was extant, now it's a little bit, now that I'm working more in Aspen, it's sort of going by the wayside. I was doing a tremendous amount of teaching in unexpected places. So first of all, there was the podcast. And the target audience of the podcast...
Chutzpod?
And the target audience of Chutzpod, thank you for the log rolling. The target audience of Chutzpod are people who otherwise are not clued into Judaism. So that was one example. And then there's the book, right? The Jewish Way to a Good Life. The target audience is, again, whoever you are, come on in. We are so happy to have you. And then I was doing a lot of different types of teaching and consulting in unexpected places. My favorite example of this is I gave a lecture / taught a class to the National Association of the Heads of Osteopathic Medical Schools, right? So doctors of osteopathy, which I didn't even know what it was. They're doctors, right? They're medical doctors, but it's a different degree than MDs. And they brought me in to teach about Judaism in the hopes that it would help them be better doctors of osteopathy. There was the Mixed Multitudes right there, because it had a lot of non-Jews. It had a lot of people from other religions. And then it had a bunch of Jews who were like, this is the first time I've been in the same room with a rabbi since I was 13 years old.
Amazing. I think my Mixed Multitude teaching was at Chautauqua. That I was invited up to the Chautauqua Institute to be like a rabbi or the clergy for the week. And that was like a very mixed multitude and being in those circles. And I always found myself, I don't know about you, what your experience was, but I always enjoyed it. I always felt like there was a desire to hear things that maybe even in my own community, it was different. It was different. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt,
Maybe in your own community?
yeah.
Definitely in your own community, right? Because when Jews listen to us, they're not just listening to Shira or David, right? They're listening to their childhood rabbi, their
Yeah,
bubby who
totally.
told them that they were. I mean, it's like we
Right.
are the repositories of all of their shit, you know.
I love
And
that
it's
stuff.
just,
Yeah.
but when you're listening, when you're
I
talking
love
to
that. By the
people
way, if you want to
across,
know that for those listening, one of Shira's claims to fame, somebody said through this, I've never heard a rabbi drop so many F-bombs. So it's great.
I know,
Oh,
David, will
God.
you promise me
I
something?
love it.
If
And
I
we
should,
can't.
if I
We're
should
not
die
editing it.
young at my funeral, please don't let someone like bring that up. I just feel like I know people say it.
Love
I
it
have
about
learned
you.
that people who curse a lot have a higher pain tolerance. So this world is filled with pain. So please, people, let me curse.
I love that you do. I love that you're so honest. I think that one of the things about you that's so refreshing, that speaks to what you're called to do. This detour that you started us with is to be a rabbi who can love people and love Judaism. And the way that you do that is by being very real. Like, I think there's something about you that is extremely approachable, extremely accessible, and extremely human, and that brings people into connection in a way that's beautiful. I've seen it.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
wonder about your yeah, a big detour that all of us as a people have been going through as Jewish people, and then we're also undergoing more global detours at this moment, I would say. But October 7th, obviously 2023, was a trauma that is still ongoing. We're not even post-traumatic at this moment. And I just wonder for you, as someone who really wants to love people and who loves Judaism and does so much work in the bridging place between the Jewish community and beyond it. What's that been like for you? I can just say for myself, I've struggled mightily over the last, I guess 18 months, 19 months with being a part of the progressive world, and as a liberal Jew and a progressive who was also very hurt and surprised and shocked, like everyone was, I think, by what took place in the immediate aftermath, even on the day of October 7th and the weeks after that and the months after that. And the desire to reach people, and at the same time, your deep rootedness in a community and, amongst Jews. What's it been like for you in the pulpit and in other spaces since October 7th?
Yeah. So first I'll start with the pain, right? The pain of what our siblings in Israel have been going through, right? I'm someone who's been to Israel maybe 50 times over the course of my life. And every Israeli, and of course the hostages as well. I've also carried pain for innocent Palestinians who have died. Like, I hate the idea, and this is not me saying whether Israel should have gone to war in the way that I'm not a military strategist, but I think that there are innocents who have died, right? There are babies who have died, Palestinian babies, and I'm carrying a lot of that pain as well. And I'm also carrying the pain of the way that the American Jewish community, for reasons sometimes good, often not, try to silence those of us who are Zionists and feel deep and profound sadness for what is happening in Israel, and also feel sadness for the innocents who have died in Gaza as well. So that's the pain, right? That's the pain point. That's what keeps me up at night and wakes me up early in the morning. That's what keeps me, it is like every corner of my house is undone, right? Like, you cannot really fully experience joy ever, because you know that your seventh cousin in Tel Aviv is in a bomb shelter, because you know that a country that you love so much, for reasons God willing good, and maybe not always, there's another baby who is dead, right? Like, you just know these things. You cannot hold joy entirely.
Did you feel that there was a tension for you between an intensified tribal experience coupled with a pre-existing and very vital and self-defining universalism that you also held within your own psyche? I would just speak my own language. Like, so for me, holding both those things, and the tension there was that what took place on October 7th threw me into a really intense kind of tribalism, the likes of which that I don't know that I had experienced in quite that way before. Like I personally feel very Jewish and very connected to Israel. And at the same time, I also feel as a part of my self-identity is that I'm also someone who, like you, can say things like it's for humanity. Like Judaism, it's not only for us, but like I'm connected to all of humanity, but I'm connected to my family in a particular way. But I'm also very mindful of my love and my connection to all of humanity. And all of a sudden, October 7th, through that, holding that tension became almost unbearable at times, right? The sense of identity with Jews and with Israel on the one hand, and also holding space in my heart for suffering and the scale of human suffering that we were witnessing. And so that's almost the way I'm hearing you speak to that, but also like the dynamics here in the United States were also very, very painful and complicated. And is that accurate?
It's such a good question, David. Are you asking it to Shira Stutman as an individual Jew or Shira Stutman as a rabbi community leader?
I guess both. Like, I think that for someone like you, it's also very, those divisions don't feel like they're so rigid. You know, how you show up as a rabbi also is very personal, very unguarded in a way, at least my experience with you.
Yeah. So for Shira as an individual, I have to say I haven't had an issue because I was lucky. I always knew that everyone hated us. And I always knew, and everyone is overstating the case, everyone doesn't hate us, but I always knew that there was anti-Semitism. I am not surprised in any way, shape, or form by anything I've seen. I went back to my therapist, who I hadn't seen in 4 years. I said, you need to refund me 10 years of therapy because I was right. And she had always tried to convince me. So whenever I did work for social justice, I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. Not because I thought when the shit hit the fan that anyone would be there for us. So I actually, it was very protective, of me. But what is true is that it has made conversations as a communal leader much more difficult, right? Especially now that I'm in a place where there is a lot of difference, political difference. There are people who understandably were in progressive spaces where they have since been kicked out, unceremoniously kicked out for being Jewish, who are like, I'm done, right? I am done. I am walking away. And that is really hard. The rift goes very deep. I hope it is not a generational rift. I really hope it's not a generational rift, but it's going to take a long time to heal.
It will take a long time. What do you think we need to do as a community to heal? Have you given some thought to that? Do you have suggestions?
I think this is a question that I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night wishing that I had given more thought to. But I think one thing the Jewish community needs to do is to figure out how to talk to each other, right? We need to start by being able to talk to each other. I'm not saying that the Jew most on the right needs to talk to the Jew most on the left, but there certainly needs to be a little bit of a widening of the aperture. And then I do think as soon as we can get up out of the dust, as soon as we can stand back up, those of us who have left social justice spaces need to re-enter. This is what Jews do. We get knocked down and we get back up again. There is always space for tshuva.
Always space to return, to repair what's been broken. It's like a perfect theme.
Yeah.
Do you feel similarly about what's going on in the United States at this moment and what we're witnessing in the current political climate? Because a lot of what I'm hearing here you are, someone whose love for humanity and love for Judaism led you into leadership, who saw like a detour became your destination. Part of your destination was to be able to bridge and bring together a mixed multitude, people from all over the place. And you're already diagnosing and saying the first thing that we have to do is we have to be able to talk to one another. Is that something? Is that also the recommendation for our body politic at this moment? Do you think in communities and? Because I know that at 92nd Street Y, there's something called the Dialogue Project. We're trying to bring civil discourse back to the American civic arena. We have something called Share Our America, which is also kind of based on how do we learn to get to know one another. Is that primary to you as a prescription for healing our divides, is learning to talk to one another?
That is the strategy I'm choosing right now. David, look, I am a lefty, liberal, so I just want to say that out loud. And so for me, under the first Trump administration, as someone who thinks he is terrible for America, which I know is not true for all of your listeners, but it's true for me, right? The first Trump administration, I tried to go all out with the resistance, right? I was like all in. I was marching every single week, all the things, right? Like in the dictionary under, whatever lib, that was me, right? There's a picture of me. It didn't work, David, right? It didn't work. And so I have decided that for the second Trump administration, Hashem has put me in a more mixed political environment because we need to figure out how to do it differently, right? And so for me, as someone who still wants to bend the arc toward justice, who still likes to use phrases like diversity, equality, and DEI, what is the inclusion? I love that phrase. I want to put it up on but clearly it doesn't work for people. And my job now is to figure out why and to figure out where we can agree, where we can allow each other to disagree, and where we have to draw a clear line between difference.
So this is like the recipe for just a recipe for healing, a recipe for being able to learn to live with one another across differences. It's not lost on me that part of your detour was literally a detour. Like you met your husband and he pulled you out of what you said, pulled you out of your Orthodox world, pulled you out of your way of looking at the world, but then you went traveling. It led you, to other cultures and other ways people live their lives. To me, it feels very similar that part of your gift, one of your gifts is like a desire to break through boxes, to live outside of assumptions, and that your own assumptions and others too, and wanting to be exposed to difference. What's giving you hope these days? I mean, you have a book out that's like you try to move people towards living the good life. Is that giving you hope?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what's giving me hope. I have a lot that's giving me hope. I am finding hope in the small moments, right? Like my son, who's even more liberal than I am, he says, I'm a progressive, you're a liberal. So he and his friends have started to work in the city where they live to make change. They said, Mom, we're not interested in the political landscape of the country. We were interested in our neighborhoods. And whatever, I could quibble with that. But still, this idea of like going small, making small change, making small connections, and then leveling up. I am part of a number of really extraordinary communities, and one of them is the one right here in Aspen that has a lot of people who have come from a lot of different walks of life. I know the word Aspen has certain connotations for people, but it's so different than what people might think. There's such a certain type of diversity of Jew here, and that gives me hope. And I will just end with that. It's very small. It's like the smallest of the smallest of the small, but it's there.
Well, I'm going to add to your ending with some of the Torah that we've already, some of the wisdom and gleanings that we've already had in the previous parts of the conversation. When we talked about, the Joseph narrative and how Joseph is in some way the quintessential detour character in the Bible. Like he thinks he's going one way, his life, winds up being completely different than what he'd expected it to be. He lives, 20 some odd years outside of a connection with his own father and his brothers, thankfully. And then ultimately, when he looks back and tells the story at the end of the book of Genesis, he says, all those detours were destinations. And one of the things that is consistent in the story of Joseph is hope. Like when they come to Jacob and say, Joseph, your son has been killed, Jacob says, no way, I don't believe it. Torah tells us, Vayima'ein Yaakov, he refuses to believe that Joseph is lost. And the word in Hebrew for more, like more, meaning like there's still more hope, is od. Like ha'od avichai, is my father still alive, Joseph says. And Jacob says it also over and over again. Ha'odenu in Hebrew means, is he still, is he still? And we were talking earlier in this conversation about more and the two sides of more. The more that is restless, the more that is acquisitive, more. The more that is more money, more houses, more. And then there's the more that is more love, more justice, more connection, more hope, right? Od lo avdat tikvatinu. We still have more hope in us. And I kind of love that you went to the small little things, like the small things that give you hope. A child who is going to make a difference locally, and I mean, in Aspen itself, I'm sure, and I know, having spoken to some of the people who are in your community, that you're making a difference in your rabbinate, in a big way. So those small things, the way that you show up and the way that you speak, your humor, it's really wonderful to talk to you, Shira. So I thank you for spending time with me today.
David, it's really an honor. You have a transformative rabbinate, and it has already changed more lives than can be counted, and I can't wait to see what the future brings.
Thank you, Rabbi Shira Stutman, for an incredible conversation. I want to thank our team, producer Efrat Bigger, editor Maya Geyer, music by Shimon Smith. Thank you to 92NY, and a special thank you to Eden Sidney Foster. As usual, I'm your host, Rabbi David Ingber, and this is Detours and Destinations. See you in the next episode.